Well, friends, our scripture lesson today is taken from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 4, verses 12 through 23. Now, when Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth and made his home in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, on the road by the sea across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people who sat in darkness have seen a great light, and for those who sat in the region and shadow of death, light has dawned. From that time Jesus began to proclaim, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went from there, he saw two older brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, Christmas was 1 month ago. It's January 25th. And so instead of gift season, it's now credit card bills have arrived season. And this year was kind of interesting. There were some articles in December talking about the holiday spending, as they often talk about every year. And this year there was a different situation in that consumers were already heading into the holiday season with record levels of credit card debt. With all of the prices that have been rising in our country, people were finding themselves needing to use their credit cards more, and so they had already gotten a record amount of debt before they went into the holidays, and then they went into the holidays with plans to go into more debt. Now, that isn't necessarily a rational thing to do, but they decide to do it anyway. And one of the things that I want to talk about today is these kinds of decisions that we make. And as we make those on-the-spot decisions, one of the things that we should keep in mind is that there is a difference between being impulsive and being responsive. When you see that perfect gift, when you see that thing that you just know that your child or your partner or your parent would love, and you decide to get it despite the creeping credit card balance, the amount of debt that you're in, the budget that you're on, when you see it and you decide to get it, are you being impulsive or are you being responsive? This is a question that I want to address as we are in this story, which is Matthew's version of the call of the first disciples. Jesus comes upon Simon, who would later be called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, and they're casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Now, at first it seems silly, and I've often joked about this, that, well, yeah, of course, do they really need to explain why they would be throwing a net into the sea? After all, if you're not fishing and you're just randomly throwing a net into the sea, that would be weird. But the issue here is a matter of their identity. It's their identity as fishermen that Jesus is going to adjust as he gives them a new task. And so he says to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Jesus makes them an offer to be a different kind of fisherman. And one of the factors in their decision is how they see themselves. And one of the reminders that we need to have is that our skills are not our identity. Now, it can be really difficult to let go of your identity. In a lot of professions, whether it's doctor or lawyer or engineer or clergy, you can have a sense of self that becomes really intertwined with your career. And it's actually kind of healthy to keep these separated. You know, one of the areas where we often see this come into play is professional athletes. Because athletes often have their careers end at a very young age, and they generally started at a very young age. So you may have a professional athlete who has been performing in their sport since they were a young child. And so they were a young child and they performed in their sport. Then in high school, they performed in their sport. Then in college, they performed in their sport. And then they turned pro. And for most, by the time they were 30, their career was over. Usually by the time they were 40. Only in a handful of cases could they continue beyond that. And then when they lose that, many of them are not really sure about who they are because their identity had been so intertwined with their skills that they had a hard time, they have a hard time seeing themselves as being something other than a person who performed in the sport that they played. So it's healthy to try and keep these things separated, to understand the difference between what it means to be able to do something, to be skilled at something, and what it means to be who we are as human beings, who we are as a person. Now, when Jesus calls Peter and Andrew, it says that they immediately left their nets. And the interesting thing is always the speed with which they make this decision. After all, very few of us have made major decisions, especially major occupational decisions, so quickly. I mean, I don't know if any of you ever just went from one job to another on a dime. How many of you went from one career to another switching on a dime? Most of us have not done that. And so I want to address today this question of the immediacy of the decision. What is the anatomy of a quick decision? All right. Because we often need to make quick decisions, but we need to make good quick decisions. And when somebody makes a quick decision, it often gets characterized as one of two things that can appear to be the same on the surface, but they're actually different underneath. And that's the difference between being impulsive and being responsive. A person acts quickly, and sometimes it seems impulsive, that action without forethought. And we generally regard impulsive decisions as not ideal. On the other hand, responsive decisions are things that we love. We love people who make immediate responsive decisions, reacting quickly and positively to be a helper, for instance. The person who sees someone in need and immediately decides to respond. But how do we tell the difference? When Simon/Peter and Andrew decided to immediately follow Jesus when he called them, were they being impulsive or were they being responsive? There was an article that I read in December in Psychology Today, and it was talking about this phenomenon of Christmas overspending. And the article related back to Plato. And in Plato's Republic, which, I think many of us read at some point in school, in Plato's Republic, Plato had a theory of the psyche, which is just a Greek word for soul, all right, and divided it into three parts. Now, I just want to put a disclaimer up front that when I talk about these secular understandings of human psychology, it's not diminishing the role of faith at all. I was trained in science, all right, so my degree is in chemistry. And I've always understood the study of the sciences as giving us insight into God's creation of everything. It's not a matter of not believing that God created everything. I believe firmly, fully, completely, that God created everything, God designed everything, and that there are natural physical laws that emanated from God within which our universe operates. And so I don't consider that scientific understanding of the physical realm to be at all at odds with our understanding that God created everything. In the same way, I believe that that is true of studying our psyche, that we are human beings created in the image of God. We are created in a certain way. And as we understand the science of psychology, as we understand the science of how it is that we reach and make decisions and live into being who we are, that this is not in any way a diminution of our understanding of the role of faith, but rather it gives us insight. And I think that insight, whether it's science or insight into the mind, can come from anywhere. And so Plato had this theory of the psyche that said that we were divided into three parts. The parts are the rational, the appetite, and the spirit. Loosely, you would describe the rational as being that realm of thought. Appetite is that realm of desire, that sort of base core want that we have. And then spirit is the impetus to act. All right? And what happens is that the spirit gives us an impetus to act, and it can be in accord with the rational or with the desire. There was often a thought that really spirit should ally itself with the rational, that somehow it would be better if all of our decisions were rooted in the rational rather than the appetite. But that's not necessarily the way we work, nor is it necessarily the best thing. So in that article in Psychology Today, they were talking about Plato's analysis, and then they said this. The author said, spirit doesn't automatically ally with reason. Spirit can join forces with either reason or appetite. And when spirit allies with appetite, rational calculation doesn't stand a chance. Now, should spirit always ally with reason? I'm not sure that that's the case. I'm not sure that that would be better. Because, for instance, when we think about that extraordinary gift, when we think about that person who is shopping in December, whether you're in a store or whether you are browsing online, and you see this gift that you think would be perfect, that it would bring joy to your partner, your spouse, your child, your parent, your friend, is it wrong to trade the irrational expense for bringing that joy? Is that a bad thing to do? All right. Not necessarily. And so I think we need to understand that that quick decision, as opposed to the rational, mathematical, calculated decision, isn't necessarily bad. And so we have this situation where these disciples who are being called are faced with a quick decision. And in the second scene of our passage, Jesus comes upon James and John, the sons of Zebedee, and they are also fishermen. The difference here is that there is this third person in the scene, their father Zebedee. And it says that Jesus called them. Now, in context and in result, we're pretty sure, right, that them simply refers to James and John. But would you know that? I mean, imagine, it says that they're all in a boat. So James and John and Zebedee are in a boat. And Jesus calls to them. Doesn't say how he called. Did he call them by name? Did he say, hey, James, hey, John? Or did he just say, hey, follow me? In which case, it might not be so clear who he's addressing. So one of the things that I've always wondered about when I read this passage is, what is Zebedee thinking? What is Zebedee thinking as he sits in the boat and Jesus comes along and calls? Does Zebedee want to be called? What do you think? Do you think Zebedee was hoping to be called? What do you imagine is going on in his mind? Is he seeing the scene and thinking, uh-oh, I'm losing my sons? Or maybe he's thinking, oh man, I would love to go. This could be a wonderful family adventure, father and sons together, going off on this adventure with this Rabbi Jesus. And put yourself in the boat. I wonder what you would be thinking if you were in the boat. Because ultimately, there was a theologian and an author named Dallas Willard, and he passed away some years ago, but he had written simply this. He said, in the last analysis, we fail to be disciples only because we do not decide to be. He simplifies it. We can all be disciples. It's just that we decide whether or not to be disciples. But I wonder what drives that decision. What's the fundamental driver in our decisions? That article in Psychology Today said that the driver is identity. Said that modern marketing discovered what academic psychology is still catching up to. People don't primarily buy things for rational reasons. They buy to express and reinforce identity. See, marketers understand identity and they prey on it. That P-R-E-Y kind of prey. They try to tell you that in order to be a good partner, a good spouse, a good parent, a good friend, a good child, you need to spend your money on this gift. Because identity sits at the root of appetite. We have an innate desire to feed the image we have of ourselves. Whatever image you have of the kind of person you think you are, your appetite is driven to feed that. You want to be the person you think you are. And so, marketers prey on that. And the article goes on to talk about the fact that the spirit can ally with either. The spirit can ally with either the rational or with the appetite. That impetus to act can be allied with one or the other. See, in Plato's original formulation of these three aspects of psyche, that Platonic division recognized the possibility of a fundamental opposition between the rational and the desire. To give you a simple example, it would be like someone thinking about robbing a bank. The appetite, the desire, wants the money. On the other hand, the rational doesn't want to get caught, doesn't want to go to prison. And so Plato thought that if you're going to have these oppositional ideas in your mind, they must emanate from different parts of your mind. That different parts of your mind are fighting with one another. The fundamental error was in believing that the rational would always be good and the appetite would be bad. For example, think about the parable of the Good Samaritan. He comes upon a man lying in the road who was left for dead, beaten by robbers. What does he do? He immediately helps. He springs into action. He makes the irrational decision to bring the person to a place for help and then promise that anything that they spend, he did not put a limit on it, anything they spend on helping this man, he would repay. that's an irrational decision from a lot of perspectives. But his appetite, his desire, was to do good, was to do the right thing. And so in that case, maybe the appetite had the superior path over the rational. But what faith tries to do is to end the war. Faith wants to align both our appetite and the rational. Faith wants to have them both aligned around the values of Christ. And so when these disciples have been called, they proceed to act in accordance with the values of Jesus. And it says that they go out throughout Galilee. They proclaim the good news. They cure every disease, every sickness. Because those are the values of Jesus. See, when the fishermen decide to become a different kind of fishermen, the kind who would fish for people, you have to be careful to make sure that your values are driving it, that your appetite and your rational are aligned. Because at one level, a fisherman can be self-serving. A fisherman can be someone who's in it simply because they want to make money at it. In the same way, a church can be self-serving. A church can simply want more people to fish for people for no reason other than the desire to bring in more fame, more money, whatever it is, and that's self-serving. But the other identity of a fisherman is to understand that what he's doing is catching fish to feed people. He can see himself as someone who is providing at a fair price the resources that people need for sustenance. And in the same way, a church ought to view fishing for people that in that sense, that our goal is not to fish for people to serve us, but rather fishing for people because it serves them, because it can help them. And whether we make the decision to help from that gut appetite or make that decision to help through our rational thought, both can be valid as long as we've aligned them. See, if either the rational or the appetite is misaligned with Jesus, we risk failure. Because sometimes the rational can lead us to help, or the rational can talk us out of taking risks. Appetite can lead us to serve others out of compassion because we see someone in need and we just have to help, or the appetite can be self-serving, in which case it talks us out of doing what's best for others and instead focuses on what's best for ourselves. And since the spirit, that impetus to act, can be aligned with either one, the way to ensure that we make better decisions is for our faith to align both the rational and the appetite, the rational and the desire around the values of Christ. And when both are aligned, decisions get better. When both are aligned, decisions can be faster or slower depending on which is wiser in the moment. But the end product will be better because it's aligned with what Jesus wants. So I pray that we would sit back and figure out how to align both with the desires of Christ. How to have our identity rooted in being people who want to do Christ-like things. because that is what will drive us to be a force for good in the world. Amen.